Welcome everyone. My name's Gemma McGregor and I'm the Provider Development Officer for Education and Early Years at NCFE. This recorded session focuses on the Autumn 2024 Chief Examiner Report, specifically for core papers A and B. We'll explore what went well, where students struggled, and how this can inform your delivery going forward. Paper A covers safeguarding, behaviour, working with others and wider educational frameworks, where Paper B focuses more on child development, observation and assessment, special educational needs and equality and diversity. Let's explore some key themes for core Paper A. Let's start by recognising where students performed well in core Paper A. Firstly, they showed a clear understanding of safeguarding principles, particularly in question 9 and 10. Responses demonstrated that learners could confidently identify appropriate actions when safeguarding concerns arose. This was further supported by their grasp of relevant legislation, as shown in question 8. Students also performed well when asked to evaluate more complex issues, such as in question 11, where many demonstrated a strong evaluation of the impact of inappropriate behaviour on mental health. Responses here were often thoughtful and connected well to the wider context of well-being. Another positive area was recall on post-16 provisions in question 3. Learners identified a wide range of options and demonstrated sound understanding of progression pathways, which is an encouraging sign. Where performers were provided, such as in questions 7b and 7c, many learners delivered well-structured responses, showing that with the right scaffolding, they can organise their thinking effectively. And finally, question 23 was notable for how confidently students explained the importance of maintaining professional boundaries, offering relevant examples and some clear justifications. These areas represent a strong foundation we can build upon moving forward. Now moving on to areas where students commonly lost marks in core paper A. A frequent issue here was the misinterpretation of the question. For example, in question 13a, students were asked to name legislation, but many instead listed policies and procedures. This showed a lack of clarity around terminology and the ability to distinguish between concepts, which needs targeted reinforcement within your teaching. In question 4, understanding of flipped learning was often vague or confused, with students unable to explain how it applies to teaching strategies. And similarly, in question 1, many struggled to accurately identify which roles in education require qualified teacher status, suggesting a broader gap in role-based knowledge. Another pattern was the number of blank or crossed out responses, especially on questions with higher marks. This may reflect poor time management, a lack of confidence, or difficulty in understanding what the question required. There was also weaker engagement with maths-based questions. Some students avoided these entirely, while others made errors or didn't show their working, losing out on potential method marks. And lastly, the quality of written communication was an issue across several responses. Illegible handwriting and poorly structured extended answers not only impacted on the clarity of the response, but also limited the marks that could be awarded. These issues point to the need for continued development in exam technique, reading strategies, and structured planning for extended responses. This slide shows a breakdown of student performance across section A, arranged in question order. Let's start with the strong or higher performance. Question 3 had a good range of well-articulated responses around post-16 education provision, showing secure knowledge and confidence with progression pathways. In questions 7b and 7c, students generally made effective use of the proforma, which helped them secure and focus their responses more clearly. Safeguarding continued to be a strength, particularly in questions 9 and 10, where students applied their knowledge accurately and confidently. And in question 11, students made strong links between inappropriate behaviour and mental health, offering well-reasoned and relevant examples. On the other hand, we saw areas of lower performance. In question 1, many students showed confusion around which roles required qualified teacher status. This indicates a gap in understanding of the structure of the education system and role-specific requirements. Question 4, which focused on flipped learning, also saw some weaker responses, with many students unable to describe the approach or explain how it could be used to introduce concepts like risk assessments. In question 13a, the issue was again misreading. Students were asked for legislation but provided policies instead, which meant that they were unable to access the higher marks. Question 22, which involved a mathematical calculation, was another low-performing question. Answers were often incorrect or poorly structured, showing that students may lack confidence or clarity when tackling numerical tasks. These insights help us focus our teaching strategies where they're needed the most, clarifying expectations, embedding exams technique, and supporting confident application of knowledge. We saw many students losing marks or failing to interpret command verbs correctly. Explain and assess were often treated as list or describe. Where students planned well, particularly with the proforma, they gave structured, high-band responses. In contrast, vague or rushed answers hurt their performance. Time to plan, time to structure and review is vital. To help address the areas for improvement and build on student strengths, here are some targeted suggestions for your teaching and delivering strategies. First, we need to support students in understanding how to approach the exam itself. Training our learners to slow down and read questions carefully, underlining or highlighting key terms. Also ensuring they understand what different command verbs are asking them to do, whether it's to identify, explain, or evaluate. Next, reinforce the foundational knowledge that seemed weaker in this series. Clarify educational roles and ensure students can differentiate between local and national provisions. Flipped learning needs more time and practical examples in delivery so that students can see how the concept is applied. When it comes to skill development, students benefit from structured support, using scaffolds like writing frames or sentence starters to help them build extended responses. Integrate short, contextualised maths problems into weekly sessions or even 5-minute starters to boost their confidence. Also, routinely practice using proformas to ensure students can interpret and use them effectively under exam conditions. Finally, building student resilience is really important. Encourage learners to complete entire mock papers under timed conditions, so they become comfortable managing their time and maintaining their focus. Remind them that even partial answers can gain marks. Leaving questions blank should always be a last resort. Embedding these approaches into your teaching will not only improve assessment outcomes, but also help learners feel more confident and in control during their exams. Now let's explore some key themes for Core Paper B. Paper B had some impressive responses, especially where students were confident in development theory and child transitions. In question 6, students showed sensitivity in how transitions affect children emotionally. Proformas in question 23 were mostly used effectively, and where applied well, they led to higher marks. Similarly, question 24 showed good understanding of parenting styles. There was significant misunderstanding of foundational concepts like Tajfel and Turner's theory for question 1 and GDPR in question 13. Students struggled to distinguish between general development and cognitive specifics in question 2. In maths, questions like question 17, complex calculations often led to wrong answers, and many were poorly presented. This slide presents a question-by-question breakdown of students' performance for Core Paper B, clearly showing which questions students found challenging and where they excelled. Starting with the lower performance areas shown in red. In question 1, many students were confused about social identity theory, particularly the work of Tajfel and Turner. This indicates a need for more explicit teaching and revisiting of some of the key theorists. In question 2, it revealed misunderstanding around cognitive development, with students often mixing this up with general development areas from the early years foundation stage framework. For questions 5 and 10, they were frequently misinterpreted. Students didn't align their answers with the question prompts or misunderstood the scenario, leading to reduced marks. In questions 13 and 17, students struggled with legislation, particularly GDPR, and maths-based questions too. Responses were either missing altogether, confused, or lacked clear reasoning. On the positive side, we saw high performance in the following areas shown in green. Question 3 stood out, with students showing solid knowledge of developmental stages, especially referencing Schaeffer and Emerson accurately. Question 6 was another strength, where students provided clear, coherent responses about supporting children during transitions, both emotionally and practically. In question 22, students showed a strong understanding of appropriate SEND terminology, with many using precise and respectful language. And in question 23B and 23C, the use of proformas helped students guide their structured and well-developed answers. This type of analysis shows us exactly where to focus our support moving forward, especially reinforcing theory, legislation, and applying maths concepts, and where we can celebrate growing strengths in transition and support SEND awareness. Evaluation continues to remain a weaker point. Many students simply list facts instead of critiquing a method or drawing a conclusion. Students would often repeat points rather than use their higher order thinking skills to evaluate. Extended answers often lacked structure, and poor quality of written communication sometimes undermined some strong ideas. Students need more exposure to less commonly referenced documents, like the SEND Code of Practice, for example, and GDPR. To support student success in Core Paper B, here are some strategies we can focus on addressing the key challenges whilst building on the areas of strength. Many students struggled with less well-known theorists like Tajfel and Turner. To help with this, prioritise structured and engaging delivery of these theories. You could use visual timelines and comparison tables so students can see how different theorists relate to developmental milestones and each other. This helps learners build mental links and improve their retention. We know that AO3, analysis and evaluation, is often a weaker point for students. Support them by teaching them to use the PEAL structure: point, evidence, explain, evaluate and link. This can help them organise their thinking. Incorporate sentence starters and show Band 2 versus Band 3 comparisons so that they understand how to push their answers further. There were notable gaps in responses to questions involving GDPR, the SEND Code of Practice, and the UNCRC. Regularly review key documents through retrieval practice, group tasks, and case studies. Show learners how this knowledge applies directly to real-world educational practice and not just focus on the theory. Finally, integrate math skills into your delivery regularly, especially within assessment contexts. Encourage your students to show their working, include units and lay out calculations logically. You could model how to interpret simple data and reinforce the importance of clarity in the responses to maths questions. This is how we can help our students build a more confident and well-rounded approach to Core Paper B. Let's look at some final thoughts and patterns and next steps. Let's begin with AO1, which focuses on the recall of knowledge and understanding. While this is often seen as the more straightforward assessment objective, the data from both papers shows that this isn't always the case. There were consistent issues with terminology recall, for example, like with terms such as flipped learning in Core Paper A and GDPR in Core Paper B, where they weren't well understood. Many students either guessed or gave vague definitions which significantly limited their ability to access marks. In addition, students showed a limited knowledge of key theorists and legislation, especially in questions 1, 13 and 16 in Paper B. Some were able to identify names but struggled to explain the theories or their relevance to practice. To strengthen AO1 performance, we need to be proactive in regular retrieval practice, using things like quizzes, flashcards or low-stakes testing to help students retain key terms and frameworks. We need to clarify definitions with context. For example, instead of just defining GDPR, show how it applies in early years settings or in safeguarding procedures. And building strong visual tools such as timelines for theorists or comparison tables for legislation, as this can support recall. And use daily revision starters or plenaries. Incorporating 5-minute recap sessions at the start or end of a lesson can significantly boost long-term memory. If students aren't remembering the core facts, it becomes much harder for them to apply or evaluate them. AO1 may seem basic, but it really is a foundation to build upon. AO2 assesses students' ability to apply their knowledge to given contexts or scenarios. This is often where the difference is made between mid-band and high-band responses. Across both papers, AO2 weaknesses were evident in more than one place. Students frequently misinterpreted questions. For example, in question 13A, where they were asked for legislation but instead provided policies, or in question 4, where flipped learning was misunderstood entirely. In question 5, many students placed the focus on the wrong individual or misunderstood the intended subject of the question, costing them marks. In other instances, such as question 5 and question 10, there was a poor alignment to the scenario. Students gave general answers instead of tailoring their response to the specific context provided, which showed that they hadn't fully understood or engaged with the scenario. To improve AO2 performance, we could teach question deconstruction, model how to pull out the subject, the command verb, and the scenario focus from every question. We could use role-based scenarios more regularly, helping students practice how knowledge applies differently depending on the context, whether it's a childminder, SENCO, or classroom assistant as an example. Include what is this question really asking starter tasks during revision. And focus on scenario-based retrieval, not just definitions, but how terms and theories apply in context. Strong AO2 responses come from confident, flexible application of knowledge that needs to be built throughout our teaching, not just within revision windows. Lastly, AO3 assesses analysis and evaluation, skills that are essential for higher band marks and extended responses. Yet this is where students consistently struggled the most. In question 19, many responses were repetitive or superficial, repeating facts or opinions without really explaining their significance or implication. In question 12 and 25, students were expected to evaluate strategies or reflect critically on a scenario. However, many responses lack depth, with very few justifying their viewpoints or offering a balanced perspective. This suggests students either weren't confident with the evaluative language or didn't really understand how to move beyond a description. To develop AO3 skills, we need to model evaluation. Show students examples of Band 2 versus Band 3 responses and analyse what makes one stronger than the other. You could use structures like PEEL, so point, evidence, evaluation, explain, evaluate and link, to help them frame their evaluative writing. You could include sentence starters for evaluation, such as this is effective because, however, a limitation might be, or in comparison to. You could use peer assessment and reflective marking tasks, where students compare their answers against model responses. AO3 isn't just about writing more, it's about writing with purpose. Students need support in building that confidence over time. There's plenty to celebrate. Students showed strong engagement with safeguarding and development, but there are also clear opportunities for deeper understanding of theory, legislation, stronger math skills and more structured responses to questions. Next steps could include integrating retrieval starters, peer marking extended answers, and embedding maths practice into your existing teaching. Thank you so much for watching, and we do hope that you found this session useful. Please do take a few minutes to complete the feedback form via the QR code on screen. Your insights are incredibly valuable to us and we appreciate them. Thanks for watching, and we hope to see you at our events over the coming academic year.